Hello, beloved, and welcome to Tuesday Text Study with me, Pastor Will. This week we'll be talking about the Revised Common Lectionary readings for this coming Sunday, February 14th, 2021. In addition to being Valentine's Day, this Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday. And Transfiguration Sunday is a sort of transitional time, marking the end of the time after Epiphany and just before the beginning of Lent with Ash Wednesday. Our texts for this week are going to be 2 Kings chapter 2. The lectionary calls for verses 1 through 12, but we're going to take it through 14. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6. And of course, the Transfiguration story from Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. So I'd like to start us with the Gospel with this lesson from Mark. Mark writes, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This is the gospel of our Lord for this Sunday. So one of the first questions that comes up here is that the reading begins by saying 6 days later. It's important for us to understand 6 days after what? In the preceding text, we have Jesus talking to his followers, and he asks them, "Who do people say that I am?" This is the text where Peter makes his wonderful confession, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus will go on to predict that the Son of Man must suffer and be put to death and rise again. It's 6 days after this that they go up the Mount of Transfiguration. And Jesus takes with him Peter, James, and John. These 3 seem to form a sort of inner circle among the disciples. And they go up the mountain apart by themselves, and Jesus is transfigured before them. It's worth pointing out that there's a difference between being transfigured and being transformed. A transformation is total, it's complete, it changes the substance of something. Transfiguration only changes the outward appearance. Jesus isn't changed into anything, but the look of him changes. And Peter, James, and John are able to see Jesus in all of his glory for who he truly is. In this moment, when Jesus becomes shining, glorious, they also see Elijah and Moses talking with Jesus. Now, scholars have talked about why Elijah and Moses, and certainly they are 2 major figures in the Hebrew Scriptures. They are both prophets who conversed with God. They spoke directly to God. Moses going up the mount at Sinai to speak with God and to receive the law. Elijah going up that same mountain called Horeb and meeting with God when he was burnt out on his ministry. The Lord passes by both of them, and they both speak to God. Moses and Elijah are also exemplars of what people were expecting in a Messiah. Moses, though he was a prophet, fills that priestly role of being the one who stands between human beings and God and intercedes on behalf of the people. And Elijah is the archetypal prophet, the one that the prophets say will come again. Malachi predicts that Elijah will come again before the coming of Messiah. And so people are expecting a Moses or an Elijah. And these two talk with Jesus. Now, we aren't privy to what they talk about. But given the context, this falls between Jesus making this prediction about his death and resurrection, and then at the end of this reading, him telling them not to speak about what they've seen until the Son of Man has been risen from the dead. It's likely that Moses and Elijah are talking with Jesus about his mission, about his messianic role as being the one who will die and rise again. Now, when Peter, James, and John see this transfiguration, they are terrified. And they know they have to do something, but they don't know what to do. And so Peter, being Peter, just starts talking. Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Now, it seems that Peter is under the impression that this moment is the beginning of Jesus' messianic reign. He's not so much hoping that they can just have a little camp out and set up some tents and stay for a little while. Peter wants to establish base camp. And he's thinking that with the coming of Moses and Elijah, that Jesus is now going to lead his forces into Jerusalem and drive out the Romans. But that's not what Jesus came to do. He knows they have to do something, but he doesn't know what to do. And then there's a voice. A cloud overshadows them, and a voice says, "This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him." We've heard this voice before in Mark's Gospel when Jesus was baptized, way back in the first chapter. A voice speaks from heaven, but in Mark 1, it seems to be speaking directly to Jesus. "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased." Here the voice is not for Jesus' sake. It is for Peter, James, and John. It speaks in the third person. "This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him." After the voice speaks, they look around and there's no one there but Jesus. And they go back down the mountain to resume their ministry and their mission. Now, this is the Transfiguration story. This is what the liturgical day celebrates, and there's a lot of good material to look at here. It's important to remember that this isn't a day celebrating a change in Jesus, but a change in his disciples who are now seeing Jesus for who he really is. Of course, in Mark's Gospel, as we've talked about before, the disciples never really seem to fully get the point. But as we continue to see Jesus revealed, it's good for us to understand that this transfiguration of Jesus needs to be transformative for us. It needs to change something in us who have seen Jesus. It's fitting that this story is the last Sunday in this time after Epiphany, because the Epiphany season is a time of revealing. And this is when we see Jesus revealed fully. Well, moving on, I'd like to look at 2 Kings chapter 2. And again, we're going to go from verse 1 through verse 14. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind to heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. He picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" When he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. The word of the Lord. Now, Elisha has already been chosen as Elijah's successor. We see that in 1 Kings chapter 19, when Elijah comes down from Mount Horeb and throws his cloak over Elisha while he's plowing the fields. But here we have the ascension of Elijah up to heaven. And this is one of only two places in the Old Testament where someone is taken up into heaven without dying. The first is Enoch in Genesis, who's said to have walked with God and been a friend of God. And now here Elijah. Elijah knows that his time is coming. And it seems that Elisha knows as well. Now Elijah tries to keep Elisha from coming with him. He keeps saying, "Stay here. The Lord has called me on. Stay here. The Lord has called me on." And Elisha says, "As the Lord lives, as you yourself live, I will not leave you." He is driven by faithfulness to Elijah, by love for Elijah, to continue to follow. In each place they go, the company of prophets also knows. Do you know that this day your master will be taken from you? And Elisha says, "Yes, I know, keep silent." It really seems to be a little more gruff than that. His tone seems to be, in the Hebrew, something akin to, "Yeah, I know, shut up, I don't want to talk about this." And so he keeps following his master until they come to the water's edge at the Jordan. And Elijah strikes the water with his mantle, and the water is parted. Now, this is reminiscent of a few places, the first being, of course, Moses leading the people out of Egypt on dry ground through the Red Sea. The other, of course, would be Joshua leading the people into the Promised Land through the Jordan, also on dry ground. In each case, the presence of God with them, through Moses at the water, lifting his staff over the water, through Joshua and the priests who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant into the waters. God parts the water. And so here again, as Elijah strikes the water with his mantle, the waters are parted, and the two cross into the wilderness. I've said before in other studies that the wilderness is a place of encounter. The wilderness is where God shows up in the Bible. And so they go out to the places beyond the river so that God might show up. Before he's taken up, Elijah asks his protege what he can do for them. What may I do before I'm taken from you? And Elisha asks for a double share of Elijah's spirit. Now, this is the typical inheritance of a firstborn son. At the time, the firstborn received a double share of the inheritance, and the others split the rest. And so Elisha is addressing Elijah as a son might address his father. He wants a double portion of Elijah's spirit. and there's a test set for him. This is a hard thing. Elijah says, if you see me as I'm being taken away from you, it will be granted. If not, it won't be. They continue to walk, in a chariot of fire and horses of fire separate them. Elijah is taken up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha watches and cries out, Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. After he can see him no longer, he tears his own clothes, an act of deep grief in Hebrew culture. And that would be the end of the reading as the lectionary calls for. But as we said, we added 2 verses because it's important to see here that Elisha picks up the mantle that fell from Elijah and goes back to the Jordan, and he too strikes the water, and the waters are parted. So we see the fulfillment of Elisha's request. He has received the same spirit, the same power of Elijah. And just as we said that with the transfiguration story in Mark, it's not really meant to be about the transfiguration of Jesus, but about the disciples being transformed. This is a story about Elijah ascending into heaven, but it's really meant to focus our attention on Elisha. Elijah's ascension is what brings all this together. It's the catalyst for this. But it's Elisha's inheritance of Elijah's power, of his spirit, that is the central point here. Now, beyond that, there aren't a lot of places to see a connection to transfiguration. But I think that's a powerful one, to recognize that it's not about the leader. It's about what being in the presence of the leader does for the followers. Finally, we'll take a look briefly at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6. Paul writes, "And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not proclaim ourselves, we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." This is the word of the Lord. It's a brief reading, and it seems that it's chosen for transfiguration because of the light imagery that shows up. This talk of the gospel being veiled to those who are perishing, but God being revealed to those who have heard the gospel. That's very in keeping. It's on message with this transfiguration theme. And Paul talks about the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, and we see Jesus revealed on the Mount of Transfiguration. But here again, this is a passage that it's important to understand its context. And Paul, if we continued to read the 4th chapter of 2 Corinthians, Paul is going to talk about suffering. He talks about being persecuted but not giving up, suffering but not succumbing. That the death of Christ is made visible in his body, so that the life of Christ may be accessible to all. And here again, that leads me to what's really going on here. This Sunday feels like a lot of surface level things, and we could preach on the surface level, but there's a lot that's going on beneath the text. As a Lutheran, Paul's discussion of suffering leads me to Martin Luther's discussion of the theology of the cross, that it's at Calvary, not the Mount of Transfiguration, where Jesus is truly revealed. We see Jesus in his glory, in his power, in his beauty this Sunday at the Mount of Transfiguration, but Luther says it's the cross where we truly see the power and the wisdom of God, power made perfect in weakness, wisdom that looks a whole lot like foolishness. We see Christ revealed in suffering. And Paul's not talking about masochism. He's not glorifying suffering. He's not saying that we should be excited about suffering. But he does understand that it's in suffering that God shows solidarity with us. At the cross, God is visibly and viscerally present with human beings. It's at Calvary where our minds are unveiled. And just as the crucifixion stories share this tearing of the temple curtain that separates the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, it's at the cross that the veil is torn away from us and we see who God really is, the suffering servant who gave his life so that we might live. Well, that's going to be all the time that we've got for today, beloved. I hope that you'll join us on Sunday to hear the sermon and find out how these things came together. But I'd love to hear what stood out to you as well. And so please feel free to leave a comment below and share what you saw in the text, what you heard in the text, and what has been revealed to you this day. Until next time, beloved, may God bless you and keep you. Amen.